This is Archaeodeath, an exploration in the archaeology of death and memory, past and present, with Professor Howard Williams.
Hi, Professor Howard. How are you?
Just Howard. Hello. Hi, JC. How are you? Or should it
I'm
be
fant-
Mermaid, JC?
Oh yeah, exactly. We're all formal in here, as you can
You've got to be
clearly
formal.
see. I dressed up for the occasion.
Wow. Well, I'm underdressed, although I've got my Cernabus Giant Archaeology Needs You t-shirt on in all
I
its
love it.
glory. Probably should be
I
banned. I'll probably get banned for that, but hey.
Not today. No, there's many different reasons for us to be banned, and that is not one of them. I'm so excited to meet you. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have several people on my end that are huge fans of, Viking culture, early medieval. So what I'm going to do is,
Yeah.
before we begin our in-depth conversation, I want you to introduce yourself to my side and let people know what you're
Fantastic.
about. What do you do? So the stage is yours, my friend. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, great. Let's start off. I'll do an introduction. So, my name's Howard Williams. I'm a professor of archaeology, and I work at a university. So, I teach and research, and I do admin and all the boring stuff. Like mainly, most of my life is deleting emails, but I call myself an archaeologist. And so, I work at the University of Chester in the northwest of England, on the very border of Wales, in the very centre of the British Isles, if you like. And what do I do? Well, I last 23 years, having completed my PhD, I've been teaching in a range of academic institutions. I'm doing field-based research, lab-based research, desk-based research into the human past. That's what archaeologists do. We study the human story through material traces, be it entire landscapes, buildings, objects, dead bodies, and things like that. So that's what we do, and I teach that stuff, and I research that stuff, and I do specialise in early medieval archaeology. Particularly early medieval Wales, Anglo-Saxon England, and Viking Scandinavia, and various other bits and bobs along the way.
So
I
where
suppose
exactly
that's
are you located? Where exactly are
right
you
now.
located? Yeah.
Right, so I live across the border in Wales, so I am a
Oh,
Welsh. I by residency and by ancestry I am Welsh, and a bit of English, bit of Scottish, bit of other bits and bobs. But I live in Wales, and I'm only 13 kilometres, 8 miles from my place of work, which is in the beautiful city of Chester, just across the English border.
oh, that's fantastic. So you're not too far away. We have a very dear mermaid friend who's in Wales, and that's my friend Mermaid Joanne, and she
Oh,
is a
right, Joanne.
wildlife biologist.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, fantastic. Well, and she's Welsh resident and everything. Good, fantastic. We need more
Yes,
mermaids
so
in Wales.
we certainly do. Well, right now she's my first one, and I said to her, because I believe Wales, you guys, out of any place in the world, you guys have the most castles per square kilometer out of anywhere else in the world, I think.
This is true. Even more than the Scottish borders, we have more
Yeah.
castles, and that
And I was
that's what
like,
comes
Mermaid
to.
Joanne, where is my mermaid castle content? Like, where is it? So I just keep telling her. But I'm so honored to meet you, and welcome to. In
Nice to
case you're
meet you.
curious, I'm coming from you from Ontario, Canada. I am a landlocked
Hey.
fish, so we're freshwater here. But I have so many people on my side that are big fans of the subject matter of your area of study. So I have so many questions for you and so many
Go
things
ahead.
to talk to you about. Um, but so the first question that I have for you, and you can take as long as you want to answer this, is how does your field specifically get funding
Okay.
to do the excavations
Yeah.
and the exploration of burial sites? Like, where does that come from?
Okay. Okay, so funding for archaeology comes from a variety of sources. So I will break this down very quickly into the fact that archaeology is a discipline in the UK, but also this applies to other places, including Canada, US, other parts of Europe. It operates through museums and government departments, through commercial archaeologists working ahead of development, and through universities. Universities often do research excavations. In other words, we only dig when we've got a good question. We don't just go, "Hey guys, let's
Mm.
just waltz off and dig up some old site." We're doing excavations that train our students and also answer specific questions. And to do that, we get funding from our own universities sometimes. We get funding from national government funded bodies. When we used to be in this wonderful thing called the European Union, we used to have access to European science money to do our work
Yes.
as well. And now we're in a slightly different situation, which is a bit controversial. But we basically urinated away that opportunity, and it's supposedly going to be replaced by UK funds, but it probably won't. So we get funded by applying for grants and national, regional funds to do field work and to do our work. I'm in a kind of interesting position because many UK universities don't make their money off their teaching. They rely on big research grants to get money in to simply pay salaries. I'm in a teaching orientated university, so I'm heavy teaching, but the good side, the strength of that means that actually my salary to do my job is largely paid by the students who come in to study. And I only have to do a little bit of extra research grant application, whereas some of the bigger UK and university departments, they really are relying on a short-term panic of constantly applying for grants just to keep their salaries paid. So I'm kind of in a lucky, it's hard work, but it's actually a good balance for me. That's the kind of way I'd answer it. So a range of places we get our money, but our salaries are paid by the government through student and government allocation of money to deliver teaching, and then applying for grants to do research.
Yeah, because you mentioned something in one of your recent videos of the Viking gaming pieces that you were many years ago that you were on the site for, and you talked about the permissions that you had to receive in order to. So when you said that you go in and you go for exploration for a purpose, there's also a certain amount of people that you have to say, hey, can we do this? Yeah. Right, and who does this property belong to, and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so you'll see certain other archaeology creators getting very, very justifiably frustrated when they come on apps like this and they find there are lots of metal detectorists who are really responsible, but some who are not, people who just collect, and that's all cool as long as it's obeying regulations. And likewise, archaeologists don't just go out, just because we've got qualified to be archaeologists doesn't give us a free right. We don't sort of rock up with an FBI type pass and go, we're archaeologists, we're going to dig this field, okay? You know, bring in the helicopters, bring in the drones, bring in the...
No Indiana Jones here, eh?
Yeah, or equivalent, 100 native workers, or, that kind of sort of colonial model of, sort of doing the job, sort of, vying against those Nazis just on the other side of the ridge, who are digging in the wrong place, that kind of thing. No,
with your whip.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, part of the game, isn't it? But we have permission. So landowner permission. Usually, if it's a scheduled monument, a protected monument, then there's government permission. There's state permissions we have to convince, and then there's the money to do it. We have to have secured. So there's lots of levels. And even when we can do it, the question is, should we do it? Should we do those interventions? Should we do the work? And then there's a whole series of ethical questions about what we dig and why. And so while I call myself a specialist in burial archaeology, in my career, I've dug very few burials. And that's not a sign of I don't have that as a badge of shame. That's a pride thing that most of my work is not about necessarily trying to disturb the rest of lots more people who were buried at various different times in the human past, but to actually investigate. We've excavated so many burials in circumstances where those burials would be destroyed if we hadn't done the work ahead of development of a railway line, a road, a new supermarket, or something like that. And there's so much research to be done on those that we don't actually need to always do new digs. New discoveries are great, but archaeology is not about discovery in terms of new finds. A lot of it is about detailed interrogation of existing data sets. So a lot of permissions required and a lot of careful, responsible choices about when and how we do our work.
So do you think that these sites, when you said that they would have otherwise been destroyed, through the piping for houses, or like you said, a railway or something like that, or a subway, is that how a lot of your work is kind of found, like stumbled upon, like someone's digging and they go, oh, what's that? I better call an expert, kind of thing. Like, is that normal for your area of field, or do you guys have high level technology to like infrared it?
Well, we have a lot of the best archaeological finds are found not by archaeologists, they're found by members of the public, metal detectorists, or just people doing a tiny bit of garden digging, or in a field and walking with their dog, and they come across something. And so a lot of the genuine archaeological finds are found by members of the public, right? And then they report them. If they're responsible, they won't just go, I'll put that in my pocket and keep it in a drawer for 20 years, or try and sell it on eBay. They'll say, which happens a lot. or we have big problems with metal detecting rallies and where those materials are not being reported responsibly. But we do have many finds, just to look on the positive side, that are being discovered by members of the public who have a sense of responsibility. That's why our public relations is so important, who then report it. We also have a lot of excavations. Most of our excavations are happening ahead of development, ahead of housing estates, ahead of roads, as I said. And a lot of the commercial sector are finding the new stuff, rather than academic archaeologists that are only doing a tiny fraction of the excavations and field work. So a lot of our discoveries come from the public or from commercial sector archaeological work, and then our job is very much to try and synthesize, put that into, give it a context, give it a meaning. Why is this stuff important? Some things you think, well, that's obvious why it's important, but it's not just simply identifying what we found. I'm trying to understand the broader context. So some of my colleagues spend most of their careers writing up specialist analyses of objects found by commercial archaeologists. So the commercial archaeologists will do the dig, and they'll say, well, we need a Roman pottery specialist who understands about international trade connections of Roman pottery to explain our site for us. We have done the excavations in a professional way, but so there's many archaeological subspecialists, many archaeological scientists who analyze the pollen remains or the plant macrofossils or the animal bone or the metalwork, and so it's a team exercise at different stages to build the story. It's rarely, and the other cliche, that even though people think of archaeology as Indiana Jones, and oh, we know that's a cliche, but there's still the idea of the single discoverer, the single, usually white male with a hat and a whip, scratching the chin and going, it's ancient Aramaic and it says this. There's still the idea there's a one person. It could be a woman, but the point is, the stereotype is of a single investigator, right? And the reality is most archaeological work is teamwork, is building stories through long-term, investigations and working with other collaborators who have specialisms. And in many ways, historians have the bigger stereotype to fight of being isolated, single, manuscript burrowing little sort of rodents. Yes. Archaeologists have another stereotype like that of the single detective or investigator. But in reality, we all rely on each other, and we're all building the story by collaborations. Yeah. So
actually, that's an interesting,
and it can be fun.
That's an interesting word that you used. You said the word story. So one of my questions for you in regards to what your field finds is, because a lot of the people, in my opinion, this is again an outsider opinion, a lot of the people that you're trying to tell their story and how they lived, they seem to live in a heavy relationship with their cultural beliefs, with mythology, with religion. And so my question is, do you find it difficult to decipher something that is more on the fantastical side and how they actually encountered an event, or maybe there was a natural occurrence, like a flood or something that happened, and maybe there's a writing or a tale of it and they're attributing it to their god and whatever. Does that often happen in your field, that you're trying to decipher what ancient people are trying to say without it being fantastical?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing that really I've addressed this in a number of videos actually, and it's something I'm really passionate about, making sure we communicate this point very clearly to audiences who may have different faiths, different beliefs, different spiritual connections, and who may have different understandings of their world and how other people in the past may have had very different understandings of theirs. And what I try to say, the way I pitch it, is that archaeologists are storytellers, and to do that, we do have to get, as anthropologists do, we have to get outside of our Western, modern way of thinking and prioritizing. And we get mocked for this. And, everything archaeologists find is ritual, it's irrational, it's part of some non-Western way of thinking. But I'm sorry, we can be mocked for that, and sometimes there are some archaeological finds where there are some pretty straightforward interpretations, and archaeologists could have gone with those, and that there are some almost comedically ridiculous sort of towers of sort of card, the interpretation is built up, and you think, how did we get to this crazy position? But I would say that while it's mocked and we are laughed at sometimes for doing that, we are doing a job that is partly science, but partly guesswork. And some people mock us for that and say, oh, it's just all made up. No, it's a careful construction of a story based on fragmentary evidence. And we have to keep a keen awareness that the people we're investigating did not hold our experience of the world. They had very different, and that goes from everything from subsistence strategies through to religious beliefs and the ways those belief systems, how the world originated, how it operates, interact on a daily basis. There wasn't just a religious time, and this is true of our society too, of course, but we so often want to compartmentalize, and we cannot do that with the human past, and to simply see these societies as more simplistic models of our own way of thinking. And I see this as really dangerous because I see a lot of history and other creators on this app actually doing this. They assert a common sense understanding of the universe based on a early 21st century Western, usually white male, and assume that gives an authority to how we should approach the past and how we should prioritize our interpretations. And it's exhausting because it seems so straightforward, it seems so common sense, and this constant rhetoric of common sense. Well, it's obvious it was this. It was obvious this is what they were doing in this particular period. It was all about economic functionality. It was all about, our priorities, and that's not an intelligent or indeed logical way to approach the archaeological record. And when you think of pressing issues for our future, this is where it also becomes exhausting. When we're thinking about our concerns over climate change, environmental protection, when we're thinking about cultural resources, we're thinking about the finite nature of our planet. If we think about the human past as simply a story of how we exploit and utilize economic resources with no engagement with that environment beyond utility, then it does serve a very powerful narrative for our future. And that's the problem with the past, is that if we concede this territory to these simplistic narratives, it's not just about what happened in the Neolithic or what happened in the Bronze Age or the Roman period. It gives credence to a perpetuation of our behaviors today and for our next generations to see this as just as the way we've always done things. People have always, I don't know what it may be. And you see it being rattled out again and again. So I'm quite passionate about that, because both our attitudes to the environment, our attitudes to the way we live, are often seen as inevitable, as we are living the way we're living because that's the only way we can do things. And I think archaeology shows us actually that there are many different ways to live on the planet Earth, and there have been a myriad of different ways in which people interact with the world. And archaeology is therefore able to show possibilities that unsettle people today, and they should. And that's the other thing about archaeology, is we shouldn't be writing cozy stories that make people feel good about themselves. We should be highlighting that the past was a different place, and it opens up new possibilities for how we do things in the future.
Well, actually, that's a really good point that you just made.
I don't know if that...
No, not at all. No, it's real. It's realistic, because you just mentioned something really, really good. And that was actually one of my questions. I'm trying to find it here. Oh, do you feel that if from your observation, especially on this app, because I've been watching some of your engagements with other people, and I'm just like, I don't know how you academics keep your cool when you just want to strangle someone. I don't understand. You're a living saint. But do you feel that Viking? Yeah, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't even engage with some of those people. I just block them immediately. But do you feel that Viking culture is romanticized in today's world, and could that possibly have consequences that are either negative or positive? Because here in North America, we have a lot of Viking aesthetic or Scandinavian aesthetic thrown at us, both on social media or over the television and stuff, and it seems to be very romanticized. So I don't really know how you guys feel about that.
I've got to react to a couple of things said in my chat, if I may, because they sort of preface what you're going to say. Is that Mary says here, hello, Mary. She says that I have lots of practice from other social media platforms of dealing with. And what's interesting is I have learned a lot. It's been quite exhausting, but I have learned and built a style of dealing with characters, because I've also realised, and this has been quite shocking, and Mary knows this very well, that actually some of the most robustly vociferous people I've had to deal with in the last 2.5 years have been within the academy. I've been actually within academic circles.
That's shocking.
And so actually, I've been used to. I have better relationships with plumbers, mechanics, academics in other disciplines, teachers. I can talk on social media with people from all manner of backgrounds. And I would also say I'm quite forgiving, because people can say things that sound naive and they sound a bit dodgy or racist or something. And then you find after a couple of exchanges, they're not at all. They may be. They often reveal themselves within a back and forth of a couple of exchanges, whether they're just trying to posture because they've got some radical or extremist view they want to spout and they don't really want to hear you. But then often there's been a few characters where I've said something back thinking they are that way inclined. And they've gone, oh, thank you for explaining, I get you now. And they say something that in a couple of words reveals that they genuinely were asking. They were just genuinely asking. And they weren't trying to. And so I would say I am quite forgiving of the public, which could be people with 3 degrees. It could be people with no education. I'm not snobbish about this. Anyone that's new to the subject. But I actually find that academics are some of the worst at this. So actually, that's my first point. But then that leads me to this Vikings issue, which I've been addressing over the last month and a bit. Because again, there's so much popular interest in the Vikings, and some people are genuinely naive about it, or don't realise that there are some really hard extremist and quite dangerous ideas out there. And a lot of people just think, Vikings are fun, Vikings are good, or Vikings are I see a spiritual connection, an ecological nature, indigenous, a spiritual, they were cool warriors. I've played video games. It can be as simple as that. And they are not wrong to be interested and fascinated in that. They are an early medieval Northern European set of cultures or set of peoples and relationships. There's a whole debate there, which fascinates people. Now, I didn't create that. That's not my problem, but it is academics' fault. We've created the Vikings. Hollywood has taken over, and people say, it's Hollywood's fault, it's Hollywood's fault. No, academics did this. 19th century, early 20th century historians, linguists, literature experts, we created the Vikings that we consume, right? So we as academics are kind of indirectly, not personally responsible. We talk about legacies and inheritance of colonialism, racism, imperialism all the time on this app. But academics can't just say, that's other people's problems. It's just silly people who don't understand the details. No, we've created this monster in a way, and we've got to keep checking it and talking with it. But we can't control people from being interested in it. But what we can do is engage with them and point out when and how they can responsibly use this. In the same ways, you could say, well, lots of people like cute pictures of dogs on TikTok. Does that mean they're all going to be mistreating dogs? No. Some of them are going to be really caring about those dog training videos, or just a picture of a cute dog jumping into a box or something. And they'll go, that's a nice dog. I never want to own a dog, but that is cute. Other people go, when I own a dog, I'm going to make sure it has fun. Others will be going, look at that dog. Let's find something horrible to do to it and so I can create a video. But that it's always going to be a minority, whatever community there is. I just randomly pick dog owners. I don't know why. There'll be the people that, don't respect the animals and do things that are just dangerous. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't keep a dog or like dogs myself. But I can be on this app and talk about those dogs and talk about training, or talk about the culture and of how to behave with animals in a home setting or out walking. So it's the same with Vikings. With Vikings, we can't stop people liking them, but we can talk about them in an informed and educational way and counter those that spin dangerous narratives. And I've finally got to your point about romanticizing, is that the romanticization of past people is not a problem in itself if it's a starting point of a journey. It's only a danger if that's as far as people go.
Yeah.
So if people watch Saving Private Ryan and use another analogy and go, yeah, I really like Saving Private Ryan. Lots of Americans died in the first 5 minutes. That was fun. And you go, I think you might have missed the point of the film. And then other people goes, yeah, they killed lots of Germans. Hooray. And you go, I think the film was about something else. You may not like Matt Damon, but you may not like Tom Hanks, but you may not think it was accurate as a representation of Omaha Beach or whatever. But at the end of the day, if that's your level, then maybe those are people to counter. But then there are stories within stories and levels of learning. And there will be people that want to take it further and learn something about the socio-economic context, the political context, the military procedures of the Normandy landings, and learn something about Jewish identity or German identity or the complexity of people's lives enmeshed in a global war. And so like in any popular engagement, there are going to be the individuals that just stop with the violence or the gore or the cool image and think that's cool. And you can't do much about that, but try to take them to the next level, to take them on a journey.
Well, this is a little bit out of the area of expertise, but like we're sort of dealing with the same thing in, my area of expertise, which is like early childhood education. And I sort of pair that up with my nonsense that I do to like help bring ocean education to children. That's basically what I do. But we kind of have this sort of thing in the scientific community of the great aquatic ape theory. I don't know if you're familiar with the aquatic ape theory. And like basically if a mermaid was,
yes.
Have you heard of this? So it's like if a mermaid is real, if mermaids were real, what would they look like? Well, they would be incredibly fatty, right? Full of blubber, and they would be covered in a thick layer of hair like a seal. They wouldn't look like this. They wouldn't look like this.
You've ruined you've ruined my life.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I'm sorry. I'm going to ruin everyone's day. But it's just awful because the aquatic ape theory is fun, right? It's a fun, great little thing that we can all talk about and like, when our ancestors came down from the trees and went to the shores and started to eat all that seafood that then expanded our brains as we started to walk upright, did some of us stay in the water? Did some of us go in there? It's a great little conversation, right?
Okay.
But then you have people that just go, listen, because you're talking about this, you're completely discredited and you're insane. And it's like, no, I understand you because we have not, I don't like to say in the words of the scientific community, I don't ever like to say the words no to people. So when children ask me, are there real mermaids? Are you a real mermaid? I just say to them, I'm like, have you ever seen a real mermaid? Right? I don't like to answer with yes or no because I haven't been to the deepest parts of the ocean. I haven't been to the furthest reaches of the world, and neither has science. Logically, probably not. But
no, exactly.
I'm sure that you probably have the same sort of thing in your world where, like, because you're building on a story, you go to one dig site and you go, oh, look at that. This person, like with the gaming pieces, and you're saying, oh, look at, they didn't have a full set. He carried gaming pieces with them to participate in the game that was happening in the afterlife. That's another part of the story. And in this burial grove, so maybe they did that. In that burial thing, maybe, we found a mirror, we found a comb. That's actually one of my questions with the combs, because the North Americans are so obsessed with combs, and the Vikings and combs, you have no idea. Do you know about our obsession with the combs?
Well, not quite so much, but you're going to have to...
God. Well, that's one of my questions. Were Vikings obsessed with hair hygiene?
Yes. I mean, I think to some extent, yes. I mean, I think most early medieval people were obsessed with hair, but I think there's a bit of a stereotype. I think it's the John of the Wallingford 12th century account that Anglo-Saxon women liked Viking men because they actually washed. I mean, that's as much of a stereotype. I mean, that's like 3 centuries later. I think we've got to be from the representations we have. All early medieval men and women would have spent a lot of time delousing and preparing their hair, washing their hair, cleaning their head hair and beard hair if they had it. And we find the archaeological evidence represented of that. So yeah, to a degree, but I don't think it's the Vikings were a bit clean and everyone else was dirty. No, that's
that's pretty much what. Oh, there's this big thing about Viking hair here in North America. And did Vikings have braids? Did they not have braids? What kind of braids did they have? Did they have dreading? Did they not have dreading? Yeah. Like, it's this huge subject for debate here.
Well, I mean, let me put it this way to you. Actually, 99.9999% of the historical events and archaeological sites that we discover, nothing matters about how their headgear or their hair looked. You know, the fact is, people say to me, oh, well, we know the Vikings didn't have horned helmets. But do you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's imagine that maybe some did. You know, I don't think there's any evidence for it. But and that's why I play this game as a piece of rhetoric. I say, I believe in horned helmets because, do you know what? It makes no difference. But people get so exercised about something that makes absolutely no freaking difference in our archaeological interpretations. And the dread. Some people are saying in my comments here the dreadlock issue, because people say, oh well, Vikings had dreads. We don't really have that evidence. I don't know what.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into why people say that, other than as just a sort of white person's reflex against cultural
Yeah, it seems to be.
I don't want to get into that. I don't know enough about it. I really don't.
No, no. Again, me neither. As a white female, it's just something that Black creators on this app seem to have brought up a lot. That specifically, you know, they'll be talking to you know, white people about how they wear their hair and what they do, and the big comeback is, oh yeah, well, Vikings had it. Like that's always seems to be the number one go-to, and I'm just like, huh.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you got a leg to stand on there, my guy.
Well, I think we can assume that many past cultures had many elaborate hairstyles, and they cared heavily about their external appearance for a variety of social, economic, aesthetic purposes. But it's like the idea about stories and storytelling, you know, getting back to your issue of mermaids, is that it's not necessarily, as archaeologists, it's not necessarily about whether we believe these things actually existed, but if we're working with oral histories, working with folklore sources, working with art, working with trying to understand how people saw their world, it's not so much about whether we want to prove or disprove a past historical reality. It's about how trying to understand how past people conceptualize their world. And that's where it's really interesting, and where I think we can explore fantastical beasts. We can explore the stories that involve interfaces between worlds, and this applies for Norse mythology as well. We're finding in the archaeological evidence the very homes, where the stories of these gods would have been told, the very artifacts which are parallels, real world parallels to the objects that are described in latest mythological stories. When we're talking about when the Norse are describing the halls of their gods, the chariots, the horses, you know, I mean, apart from the 8-legged thing, you know, they are described. They had a real world, where they are adorning their own best ponies, which they are. Early medieval horses are basically ponies. You know, they're not big.
Yes.
Everybody looked like John Wayne. Everyone looked like John Wayne on a horse. You know, everyone because they were all little ponies. You know, Icelandic ponies are the closest we have in Europe to early medieval breeds. But everyone was adorning and combing and, you know, looking after their ponies and dressing them up, and they're imagining the gods as having that extra, you know. So that the world we find in those myths is a world very tied to the reality. I mean, I don't know if someone's done it, but you could do a comedy modern day version of it, and well, it's like American Gods, I suppose. You know, Neil Gaiman's done this, you know, but you know, the modern day version of a polytheistic pantheon where everyone's driving the blingiest cars, living in the biggest mansions in the, you know, in the Hollywood Hills, that kind of thing. That is the world. It's like a soap opera world that the Norse mythology is. It's the Viking version of a modern soap opera where everyone's got extra bright, sparkly teeth, and everyone's got slightly different relationship problems, occasionally lopping each other's heads off, you know, which doesn't appear in most American soap operas.
Just a normal Friday.
Yeah, but you know, it's that level. It's that stylization of real life. So it's not a fantasy world. It's an abstraction and stylization of their reality. And so I think.
Do you find that their deities and their beliefs and their mythologies often have a lot of parallels to like something that we're more familiar with, Roman mythology or Greek mythology? That like these people kind of have. They're very dramatic. They're very dramatic gods. They're very emotional beings.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some parallels. I think a lot of the way the too close parallels can be made, and I think a lot of that is a result of 19th century authors trying to make the Norse pantheon the Norse version of the Greek pantheon. So a lot of the way we perceive the Norse pantheon is basically a reflection of us trying to make them look like Greek gods, and which is really interesting when we when we come full circle with God of War in these video games, where they're taking
Yeah.
Norse gods and Greek gods and putting them in the Norse pantheon. That is very much a parallel for 19th century myth making, but that's another story. But in short, yes, the emotions, the pettiness, the jibing, the jokes, it's all very human, and I think they are again stylizing those human relationships, human emotions into that world. But they're, that is not an abstraction from the archaeological record. The archaeological record doesn't give us those gods, but it gives us the people that engaged in cult practices, imagine these gods might intervene at any moment in their lives in some indirect or direct way. So we have those kind of connections that we can explore. So when we're finding sort of representations of potential deities in on art objects, we're not seeing necessarily. We can't get into the minds of past people, but we can see the material world. That's what archaeology can do, and the other subjects can't. Yeah, we can.
Do you remember how a few weeks ago I was asking you, did the Vikings have a relationship with mermaids or mer culture? Because I know that the Welsh have mermaid myths and they're morfochwyn, which Mermaid Joanne taught me that word. But because in from my observation, and again, this is just me as like a fangirl, I guess you can call me. I'm not a learned person. I don't have a degree in the subject or whatever. I don't claim to be a historian because I'm not. How ancient people interacted with the sea and like their creatures or their deities that came with it kind of give me a tip off on how they viewed the ocean, right? And what their relationship was with it.
Okay. Now, I'm not an expert on this, and this is going to be a bit of a fragmentary answer. I'm sure there are people who are well versed in Scandinavian later mythology, where mermaids probably appear a much more common thing. In terms of Norse and early medieval stuff, I'm not too sure. I don't think we have. I may be wrong. I'm happy to be corrected here, but I don't think we have much mermaid culture. What we do have, though, is evidence that, sea monsters were a real perceived entity, and they were, because whales, schools of dolphins, porpoises for small craft would be massive beasts in a way that only tiny rowing boats can reconstruct that sense of the size of sharks and the size of basking sharks in northern oceans. We know that the Norse were whaling. They were not simply just killing seals on the coast, or they were hunting walruses in the high Arctic. They were whaling for smaller whales. They were killing smaller whale species. We've got archaeological evidence of whalebone objects being traded across Scandinavia. So they're exploiting marine resources on a massive scale, not an industrial scale in the modern sense, but there were coastal resources, island communities, coastal communities. They were hunting, and they were relying on beached whales. There's a wonderful Icelandic saga, wonderful as in grim, Icelandic saga account of a memorable event that happened in the 10th century, remembered in a 13th century saga, of a fight that broke out around a whale carcass, a big whale carcass, and how many people were killed. I think about 3 or 4 men were killed fighting over this whale carcass, including one who ripped out a whale rib and stabbed another one, while they were cutting up the body. So the point is, if you're a desperately starving people, this whale could get you through a winter on fuel and food, and you are going to fight for it. So we have some fascinating insights into.
What were they doing with the whales? What were they doing with them? Were they using the entire animal? Did they only harvest them for one thing?
Everything later, as with later, they were fuel, oil. They were eating everything they could. They were using the bones for objects. So so we're looking at everything you could possibly, exploiting everything of the animal, so we certainly have that economic aspect that's alive and strong. In terms of sea, myths of sea creatures, I think we have to rely on much later Scandinavian stories, and I don't know enough about them. And I certainly from the sagas, one of the things that is really clear is a sense of that the land is inhabited by spirits, and that sea spirits can scare the land spirits away. And so one of the things that we have from the saga literature is that the ornamented figureheads on ships would be covered up when the ship approached land, because otherwise it may be bad luck and scare away the land spirits. Now, there's different ways of thinking about that. Does that just tell us a little bit of superstition, or does it mean that they thought of the ship as an animated beast, which often they were naming them as such, and that they generally saw a tension between sea spirits and land spirits that was being enacted if they actually pulled? Because remember, long ships, so were pulling them up onto the beach. So it may not be the approach as in approach of seeing them over the horizon that would scare the land spirits. It's actually the idea that these 30-meter long beasts, wooden beasts, human crafted ships, are being pulled up onto the land, that you had to cover the figurehead to prevent bad luck through the land spirits leaving the land.
That is so cool.
We don't know. You see, we have little hints from the 13th, 12th, 13th century stories recording pagan times, but we're not really sure what was behind that. But we can imagine that pre-Christian people and early Christian people imagine the world as animated with spirits, dangerous and benevolent, both on land and sea. But I don't know enough about that. I'll leave it at that, because I'll be going into territory.
But that is so cool, because like geographically where you're located, there are some very kind of, actually, in my opinion, it sort of resembles the shores of Newfoundland a little bit. It was like some cliff sides and like the relationship between the water coming up and smashing. So if they were envisioning a tension between the land deities and the ocean deities, they were witnessing it in nature. So to me, that kind of makes sense, right? They would have been watching the storms come in and hit the rocks. Maybe they're watching, like, envisioning a deity within the waves trying to overcome the rocks, and then the rocks are still steady and they're staying firm and stuff. That could have been, they're observing nature around them. Right? It's like, I love that so much. That is so cool.
This is from a Christian poem, an Anglo-Saxon poem. It's nothing to do with the Vikings so much, but it's to do with the most famous Anglo-Saxon poem we have surviving is the poem called Beowulf. And the poem from Beowulf is a Christian period poem, but it contains it's part of a long oral hit tradition of legendary heroic poems telling the deeds of monster slaying of legendary heroes, back in the 5th, 6th century in the migration period. And what people forget about the dragon in Beowulf, the Beowulf finally dies in the poem, slaying a dragon that was living and guarding treasure in a mound, is that really, people think of it, people have looked at that poem for 150 years since its first, 180 years since it was first transcribed and translated, and thought about this dragon as a sort of fire-breathing winged beast. And we have Smaug, Tolkien took the idea of Smaug directly from Fafnir in Volsung Saga, but also from Beowulf. And we have this beast that's very landward, very landlocked, right? But of course, if you think about it, and Tolkien helps us here, the dragon ends up crashing into Lake Town and in the ruins of Lake Town. It becomes submerged in water. And Tolkien got that idea directly from Beowulf, because what they do after the dragon is slain by Wiglaf and Beowulf is they haul this monster over a sea cliff into the water. And so if you think about that, what the poet is describing to the audience is the bones of a whale. So for the audience listening to this poem, this fantastical story, the material connector, the anchor, to use another maritime metaphor, the anchor for the narrative are the bones of whales washed up on the seashore, that are the bones of sea monsters. And Beowulf, and whatever the dragon looked like in the imagination of the people telling the story of Beowulf, and they didn't have our modern fantasy literature Dungeons and Dragons and Smaug. That beast, which was part serpent, part lion, part all these. It's a magical, mythical beast, but it ended up in the water, ended up in the sea, its body being smashed by waves against a sea cliff. And therefore what they were thinking of was whalebone. And the link here is that one of the most amazing 8th century objects that we have surviving and in the British Museum is a casket of whalebone that was clearly used as a reliquary to hold the bones of a saint, or the relics linked to a story of a saint. So a holy object that was made of whalebone, and it actually says on it, it's text, it's runes inscribed on it, say I'm made of whalebone. So you have this in the early medieval imagination. Whales inspired the idea of dragons, and inspired the idea of sea monsters, and beasts that are found in the waves and also found on land. And did they imagine these things that roamed in the past? And Tolkien's dragons, both in the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, that's why I mentioned Tolkien, because people are probably more familiar with Tolkien than they may be with Beowulf. They are a bit serpent, bit aerial beast, but also they end up in water a lot. And their fates relate to water a lot, both Glaurung and Smaug, because Tolkien's taking his ideas from these early medieval northern dragons. And I think a lot of it, I'm not trying to find a practical single explanation for why dragons were thought up. I'm just saying people were imagining dragons as ending up having a doomed fate in water, whether they lived in water or ended up being dumped in it. And I think that's really fascinating.
That is really fascinating, because like if you look at the carcass of any whale that you guys would have been encountering on your shores that would have washed up, if you look at the carcass of a whale, it doesn't really reflect the size of the body, because whales have a lot of soft tissue. And a lot of, soft cartilage that can go away. So the rib cage is kind of there, and then their tail is very long, right? So that makes a lot of sense. And even their pectoral fins, when you look at the fin on the inside, it looks like fingers, right? Because they were once land mammals, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me. That why they would envision or draw, like if you were to see a whale carcass for the first time ever and then draw what you think the animal would look like, it may fly. Because the pectoral fins look like angel wings, kind of. They look like wings.
I mean, ancient people would have accessed also plesiosaur fossils, dinosaur fossils. They would have come across fossil bones as well. And there's been a whole discussion.
Oh, can you imagine what they would think those are?
And there's a whole book about the potential. I haven't really read it in detail, but there is a whole discussion about whether ancient Greek myths are inspired by, and various other, mythical beasts might be inspired by dinosaur fossils, or not dinosaurs, just dinosaurs, but ancient fossilized creatures of different ages, including woolly rhinos and so on. But then you also had the genuine sea beasts of our world, and not only would have they seen them on the sea coast, but in rivers, big estuarine rivers like the Humber, the Thames, the Rhine mouth, the whole of the North Sea coast would have had accidental whale beachings, but also whales where you would have encountered them up close on a regular basis. If you're a maritime people, you would have been out with the dolphins, out with the porpoises, out with the smaller whale species in the estuaries, I'm sure, on a regular basis. So people would have had intimate knowledge of these beasts, but not when their bones were washed up. They may have, the bones, as you say, inspired different stories, perhaps,
Yeah.
I think there's a whole series of interesting, things we could explore further about these. As someone said in my chat about the oceans as liminal spaces, and thinking about the anatomy as a sort of, there's all sorts of interesting points on my side in my comments. Sorry, from archaeology.
Oh, I'm glad that people are interested in my nonsense. But like, I also find that
great.
Another thing that fascinates me in regards to seafaring peoples, like the Northern Scandinavians, early medieval Welsh people, English people, Scottish people, Irish people, is that when you're in these boats that are made out of wood, essentially, the sound coming from underneath you, not just the waves, but if a human being gets close enough to a sperm whale or a humpback whale, a sperm whale can vibrate you to pieces with its sound. It will literally vibrate your body apart. And a humpback whale will rupture your eardrums, melt your brain, and rupture your spleen if you're too close to the sound that comes from these animals. So the whale, like that sound that comes. So can you imagine what that noise would do to like ancient people who don't know anything? No, imagine you're in this boat and you hear this.
About that at all. That's a fascinating point.
Right? You hear these noises coming. And you would hear a bunch of them because whales are pod creatures, right? They're in families. So you would hear like multiple coming from around you. And what would you, okay, no one move. No one do anything. Don't say anything, like this kind of thing. So
that's a brilliant point, which is, this is why talking to people is so important who know stuff about things that I don't, because I hadn't thought about that at all, about just and just the unexpected nature of it, the scale of it, and the damage it could do, if you're too close.
Yep.
I hadn't really thought about all those points. That's fascinating.
And also, we do have historical records of this is a little bit more during the whaling times. But if you're telling me, I didn't know this, but if you're telling me that these cultures were whaling people, depending on the whales that they were actually hunting, I'm not sure the species. The whales have been known to strike back. So the tale that we have of Moby Dick is based on a true story. It's based on true events. So if they're in this tiny little boat and like they would have to hook themselves something small, so they would be after a calf, then that mama is coming straight at you with its head, right? Yeah. They're very intelligent. They're very, very intelligent animals. So there would be a high amount of danger. There would be possible, again, I don't know if they were hunting baleen whales or toothed whales. Do you know the species of whale bone that are typically found in your area?
I've read up on this, but I can't remember. I'll probably get it wrong if I say. A smaller whale species is what the
smaller whale species. So I'm thinking maybe
pilot whales. Pilot whales was the term that I've heard used. But
pilot whales are a false killer whale. So they're toothed. They have quite nasty teeth, and they're quite often. No. But they do have a lot of teeth, and that would explain, like the dragon-esque mouth. They're quite docile and sort of stupid and easy to get close to until you provoke them. And also whales sort of have a culture to them that they will pass down knowledge of danger. So they change their migrational patterns. They communicate and say, hey, see that? That's dangerous. Don't do that. Don't go there. So we see this a lot with our Canadian orca whales from the 70s craze of orca capturing for SeaWorld and Marineland. When a boat is out there, mothers with the calves will go off in one direction, and then several females without calves will go and lead the boats in a different direction. We see it in our humpback whales here in North America because of our whaling craze. Their migratory patterns are still very different, and they avoid traditional whale hunting grounds to this day, even after, I don't know, it's been 120 years that whaling's been banned here. So just thinking about that they would be hooking a smaller whale species, and then the aggression that would be coming at them from the pod would also maybe influence their tales of sea monsters or their relationship with the water. Because it's interesting to me that they would be fighting over a whale carcass that really isn't good to eat. Like once that whale gets up on the beach, once it's died, its meat is kind of no longer good, depending on how long it's been sitting there. So that maybe tells me that they were afraid after a while to go hunt them, that maybe something had gone on for so long that they were afraid to get in the water and actively hunt them, that they were just waiting.
I mean, we don't have any detailed accounts from this period. It's very early, but we do know that it's not just the Vikings. We know that the Bretons, the Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, all these coastal peoples were hunting. But I'd imagine they were keeping away from the bigger beasts. But even so, you're in small vessels, coracks, and then longships. You've got to haul this thing back with you in some way.
Well, you got to kill it first. You got to kill it.
I mean, we know in the Faroes they have these gruesome, trapping them in inlets and things. And I mean, I suspect that's more what's going on rather than going into deep water after these beasts. But still, it's dangerous. I mean, walruses are dangerous. For small weapons, for small vessels, I think we're looking at. I think that I think they're going to have to be very limited in what they can do. We do have evidence they're utilising marine resources. Exactly the details of that is not as clear as we'd like.
Well, that's where our storytelling comes in.
Absolutely.
I want to play
user storytelling. Yeah,
exactly. It's a storytelling. It's fantastical storytelling mixed in with a little bit of fiction, and mixed in with your ability, I think, to change your opinion or change your story based on new evidence found. Because I think that that's a huge thing, right? Like you've got this fantastical story, you've got this picture that's forming, and then all of a sudden someone unearths something else that either completely contradicts what you just said and found or whatever. And I see the scientific community kind of split on that like they're holding fast to their opinion. Nope, this is the way they did things. But what about this thing? I don't care. Nah, it's something else.
We're all guilty of it. As I mean, even about this guy here, who everyone thought was prehistoric or 17th century, and only last year did we find evidence that it's early medieval. So it's just before the Viking Age. It's Anglo-Saxon. It's probably 8th, 9th century. And I had nothing riding on this hill figure in Dorset being of a particular date, but just everyone is lazily assumed various scenarios of its carving. And then you have a situation where suddenly the evidence comes back and tells you something completely different. We've got to adapt and say,
Yeah.
what are the implications of this new dating or new discovery? How does this fit into the existing picture? And the fun of archaeology, I said that archaeology isn't just about discoveries, but archaeology is an ever increasing, resource of new information in a way that I'm afraid to say, certain other historic disciplines are not, unless we find like the Dead Sea Scrolls moment, a discovery of whole new sets of texts does happen, but really we're working with a finite and ever decreasing resource as the preservation of these manuscripts depletes. But with archaeology, we're just growing all the time. And with ice melting, we're finding even more objects coming out of the ice from glaciers and that have been literally frozen for millennia. And that's true of both dead species, woolly rhinos, woolly mammoths, and so on, but also of artifacts that have been in permafrost for all that time. And
that is so cool.
So there's so many new ways in which we're discovering about the past through archaeology. And so in many ways, the rhetoric I always throw at historians to annoy them is that our historical research is just a minor, specialist, weird, aberrant subset of archaeology. We are the real subject studying the human story, and you can do that with documents too. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's just a very odd way to spend one's time when there's so much archaeological evidence to entertain us and interest us.
For relaxing times, make it Archaeodeath time.